Please give a huge PSA London welcome to Roger Fairhead.
Do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you? Where are you going to? Do you know? Those lyrics were actually sung by Diana Ross as the theme tune to a film called Mahogany. This was a film about a young girl called Tracy Chambers who grew up in a poor neighborhood of Chicago. Tracy had a dream. And her dream was to become a successful fashion designer. Her dream inspired her to do everything she possibly could to pursue that dream and make it become a reality. Along the way, she was spotted by a fashion photographer called Sean McAvoy, and Sean invited Tracy to join him at the fashion capital of the world, on the catwalks in Rome. It didn't take long for Tracy to become Sean's top fashion model, and he gave her the stage name Mahogany. Not long after that, she'd established her own design house, and she was modelling her own designs and selling them to the rich and famous. Tracy's dream had become a reality. The first part of prize-winning leadership is all about your dream, about something inspirational, about something that inspires you to do everything you possibly can to pursue your dream and make your dream become a reality. Well, I love music. I love playing music. I love listening to music. In fact, whenever I'm listening to music, it's actually hardly ever the lyrics I'm paying attention to. For me, it's the bass line I'm focused on. After all, it's all about the bass, no treble. So when a friend of mine asked if I'd like to start playing bass guitar in a band, well, I jumped at the chance. I got an old bass guitar and a cheap combo amp, and I'd even played in a couple of small gigs some 10 years previously. It wasn't until I got a hold of the copy of the music and started practicing that I remembered they don't use music on stage. Not only would I have to learn the pieces, I was going to have to memorize them in order to be able to perform on stage with the band. Now, I don't know about you, some people have really, really good memories. You know, they can remember names and faces, they can remember people, all sorts of places. They're the sort of people that are really good to have on your team on those quiz nights. Who does quiz nights? Unfortunately, that's not me. I'm not one of them. In fact, I like to put it this way. I've got a really good forgettery. and it's getting better with age. In fact, if there's anything you need forgetting, just let me know, and I'll forget it for you. So for a while, I wrestled with the notion that I'd have to abandon any idea of playing bass guitar on the stage. But my passion for music and my eagerness to play bass inspired me to do everything I possibly could, to confront those inner voices that say, you'll never be able to do it. You'll never be able to achieve what you want to achieve. You're going to look a fool. You're going to stand on stage with nothing to play. I remember on one of my first outings, somebody in the audience asked the sound crew to turn the bass guitar up because they couldn't hear anything, only to be told, I don't think he's playing anything at the moment. Well, I persevered, and I managed to find ways to help me remember my part. And now I play regularly throughout the year. Every dream needs a prize. That's an inspiring image of the future that produces passion in people and turns have to into want to. When you go and listen to a band, you can hear the singers, can't you? You can hear the electric guitar, you can hear the drums, but you can feel the bass. My inspiring image was to be the person on stage making the sound that people could hear. After all, bass guitar is the bacon of music. The second part of prize-winning leadership is all about delivering your dream. Do you get what you're hoping for? When you look behind you, there's no open door. What are you hoping for? Do you know? Well, when I was growing up, I wanted to be an engineer. It's a challenging objective, I know. But I spent much of my early career managing engineering projects. The thing I learned about engineers, the thing about it, any engineers in the room, I've spoken to one or two, we're really, really good with things. We're good at designing things, creating things, building things. If your car's broken down, if your lawnmower doesn't work, it's an engineer you'll turn to. We're really, really good with things, but we're not very good with people. As a project manager, I discovered that you can manage things, but you need to lead people. I discovered that a key differentiator between success and failure often had a lot to do with effective leadership skills, with leading people well. Because if you can lead people well, then you can turn have to into want to, and then people will inspire themselves to be great. So how would you define leadership? Any ideas on how you define leadership? Any thoughts?
Influence.
Influence, I love that. Leadership is influence. Great, I love it. Any other thoughts on how you define leadership? We have one over here.
Encourage people to show and shine their own qualities.
Fabulous, yes. Show their own qualities. Encourage your people.
And to shine them as well.
And to shine. Yes, to shine your qualities. I like it.
Responsibility.
Responsibility, absolutely. A leader needs to take responsibility.
Empowerment.
Empowerment, I love it. There's some great ideas coming out here.
Being someone that people want to follow.
Being someone people want to follow. One of the definitions I like is that leadership is about going from here to there. After all, if there's no there to go to, why bother leaving here? Another definition is that leadership is about taking people with you from here to there. After all, a leader with no followers is simply taking a walk. A couple of people mentioned leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. My definition of leadership is that leadership is intentional influence in the context of relationship. Intentional influence in the context of relationship. So let's just dig into the influence bit for a few minutes for the time we have here this afternoon. The first thing I'd like to say about influence is there's good influence for good, there's influence for bad, and for genuine leadership, genuine influence has to start with integrity. Has to start with integrity. Now, integrity comes from the same original word as the word integer. And the mathematicians above us or amongst us will know that an integer is a whole number. So one definition of integrity is that our words and our actions are whole and complete. Another definition of integrity might be that it's not doing that thing that you wouldn't want to see on tomorrow morning's newspapers or tonight's evening news or perhaps social media in the next 5 minutes. But I think genuine integrity goes further than that. I think genuine integrity is about doing the right thing even when no one will notice. So let's look at influence. The first stage of influence I call modelling. And it's all about equipping others. The first stage of influence is called modelling, and it's all about equipping others. We see this in families all the time when children model themselves on their parents, don't they? Or maybe they model themselves on their older siblings as they're growing up. Or maybe they start to model themselves on their friends. In fact, there's a story I was going to tell you earlier about integrity. And this story, when I was growing up, I used to hang around with a bunch of mates. And one summer, a couple of the lads disappeared. And so the rest of us decided we'd try and find out where they got to. We finally caught up with them in our local park, having a smoke, hiding in some bushes. Well, we were all of us of an age where we were about to move up to high school, so we were feeling pretty grown up. And this seemed like a pretty grown-up thing to do, so we decided to join in. We used to take it in turns to buy a packet of 20 cigarettes from a vending machine outside the local corner shop. It would cost £0.50 a pack. Who can remember those days? And you get the change inside the cellophane wrapping. Do you remember those? Anyway, on the way home, all of a sudden, I had this thought, this terrible thought: what if Mum notices? And what if she tells Dad? But then I had this brilliant idea. I thought, what I'm going to do, this is what I did. I cupped my hands, blew into them. No, I think I'm going to get away with it. Well, of course, I didn't get away with it at all. As any non-smoker will tell you, they can usually detect the slightest trace of smoke on a smoker for hours afterwards. It's a bit like that when someone compromises their integrity. They may be able to get away with it for a little while, but it leaves a trace that others will be able to notice sooner or later. The thing about integrity, though, is that we're not born with it or without it, which means that it's a behaviour-based trait that we can cultivate over time. We can set ourselves the goal to show more integrity in everyday life, and we can move towards that goal by practicing. So moving back to into influence, first level of influence is about modelling. And as we're growing up, we sometimes model ourselves on our friends, rather as I did when I started smoking. So not all models are a good influence. A great example of modelling is actually found in apprenticeships. Are there any apprentices in the room? One or two, perhaps. When I left school, I was lucky enough to get a place as an apprentice with as a student apprentice with Michelin, the tyre company. This was what happened for this was that I would have to work for them during the university holidays, and then they would pay all my university fees and give me a salary on top. For the first year, we had to spend some time working in the training school, working with some master craftsmen. And one of the first jobs we had was to learn how to use a hammer and chisel to slice a thin slither off the edge of a larger block of metal. While we were hammering away, this master craftsman had come round to each of us in turn. He'd point to a sign across the other side of the room and say, "Now, read to me what that sign says." Well, as you can imagine, many bruises later, we were getting quite good at hammering. But we also learned a far more important lesson. And that was to take our eyes off the point of impact and to focus on the point of application. To take our eyes off where the hammer was hitting the chisel and to focus on where the chisel was cutting through the metal. A really valuable lesson in so many ways. So the first level of influence is called modelling and about equipping others. The second level of influence is called motivating. We see this again in families, don't we? Parents encouraging their children. We see it in sports fans where sports teams are cheering their favourite sports teams on. For a good number of years, I was a member of a cycling club. And we'd always be encouraging each other and cheering each other on whenever we're at time trials races or other sporting events. So when I was at school, however, I used to love sport. I used to love sport at school, but I wasn't always a very good student. There were some subjects I really enjoy, like maths and physics, hence the engineering, I guess. But really, the rest of them I didn't really engage with at all. In fact, there was one subject I was really, really good at failing, and that was French. And I managed to fail that quite spectacularly, twice. So when I joined Michelin and had to start taking French lessons, then you'll be no surprise that I was actually started out at the very bottom of the dunces class. Then one summer holiday, during the summer vacation, all the Michelin student apprentices had to spend some months working at the headquarters in France. Now we were immersed into the French culture, and for 6 weeks of that time, I had no English friends around to talk to at all. Now I really had a reason to learn the language if I wanted to talk to anybody at all. For a couple of weeks, I spent my time translating some training materials from English into French, and it was put to use by the training instructor in a room right alongside. And every now and again, I used to hear roars of laughter coming from this room, as I'd obviously translated something incorrectly, or perhaps inappropriately. Now, the strange thing was, when I got back to the UK, however, I found that I'd been moved from the dunces class to the advanced conversation class. Then a few years later, I had to spend 6 months working in France, working and socialising exclusively in French. Now I really had a motive to learn the language because I knew that the things that I was being trained up for in Clermont, I was going to have to use and put into practice when I got back to the UK. In fact, just before I left to come home, one of my colleagues came across. He says, "Hey, Rog, I've seen you about a fair bit, but I just can't place your accent. Whereabouts in France are you from?" Now, the thing is this. Now I had both a reason to learn and a motive to learn. It had become a necessity. And the strange thing was, as I started to get more fluent, it unexpectedly became quite exciting. Now I actually enjoyed getting better at speaking the language. Now I wanted to learn. So the second level of influence is about motivation and about encouraging others. The third level of influence is called mentoring. And this is to do with empowering others. Now, just to put this into context for those of you who aren't familiar, there's teaching, coaching, training and mentoring, which are all in a similar space. If someone's teaching, they'll normally be using a curriculum. They'll have a syllabus to follow for their subject. They'll probably have a scheme of work for the current season they're in, whether it's a term or a semester. And they'll have a lesson plan for every lesson that they're going to do, all laid out nicely. The teaching is all about sharing information and turning that information into knowledge. Training, on the other hand, is about acquiring skills for some particular job or activity. Rather, as when I was using the hammer and chisel to learn how to use it, I was learning a skill to do a particular job. So teaching is about information, training is about skills. Coaching, on the other hand, when someone's coaching, they don't actually share any new information at all. This is the definition I run with, that they don't actually share any information at all. When someone's coaching, they assume that the person they're coaching knows all they need to know. They have all the skills, all the information they need. But it's my job as a coach to draw that out of them and then to help them to apply it to their situation and maybe to hold them accountable. In coaching, people don't get their questions answered. They get their answers questioned. In mentoring, however, normally people will have some relevant experience to share. Who's heard the expression, experience is the best teacher? Quite a few of you. I would tend to disagree with that. I would prefer to say that evaluated experience is the best teacher. I started smoking at 10. When I wanted to quit, I'd wake up one morning, I'd have a mouth feeling like an ashtray, I'd have an empty wallet, and I'd decide it was time to quit. And I'd quit, I'd throw the cigarettes away, and a few weeks later I'd start again. And then I'd wake up one morning with an empty wallet and a mouth feeling like an ashtray, and then I'd quit again. And that cycle kept on repeating itself until one day I evaluated that experience and said, actually, this is silly. And I managed to quit completely. That's nearly 20 years ago, and I've not smoked since. So I'd rather say that evaluated experience is the best teacher. And what better way to learn than from somebody else's evaluated experience? So mentoring is the third level of influence. The fourth level of influence is called multiplying. And this is where you can really extend your influence. When my children were small, every now and again, we used occasionally, on the way home from school, we used to take them to the local corner shop and buy them some sweets. Often it was my wife's job. Sometimes it was my father-in-law who'd help out. But on this particular occasion, it was my turn. My son shared this story with me, actually, a few years ago, when we were talking about leadership and about leadership lessons that we both learned over the years. Normally, we'd take them to the shop, we'd ask them what sweets they wanted, and then go and buy them for them. On this occasion, Adam reminded me that I gave him some cash, told him to go and choose the sweets that he wanted, and take them to the cashier himself. He explained that for his young mind, he was feeling equipped with the cash. He was feeling encouraged to go and select the sweets himself. And he was feeling empowered by going to pay for them at the cashier on his own. And the thing about multiplication is that if you equip, encourage, and empower followers, then you'll add to your leadership. But if you equip, encourage, and empower leaders, you'll multiply your leadership. So, I have a question for you. Do you know where you're going to? Everybody ends up somewhere. Some people end up somewhere on purpose. Thank you.
Thank you.